Hello, and welcome back to Old News, the podcast where yesterday's headlines get a second look. Today, we're stepping into 2021, a year many hoped would be about recovery, but instead became a stress test for democracy, markets, technology, and global power. The year began in shock. On January 6th, as Congress convened to certify the results of the presidential election, a violent mob stormed the United States Capitol. Fueled by months of false claims that the election had been stolen, thousands gathered in Washington, D.C. What began as a rally escalated into an unprecedented assault on American democratic institutions. Rioters overwhelmed police barricades, smashed windows, vandalized offices, and roamed the halls of Congress, chanting threats against lawmakers and Vice President Mike Pence, who had refused to interfere with the certification of the vote. Members of Congress were evacuated or forced to barricade themselves inside offices as the constitutional process ground to a halt. 5 people died in connection with the attack, including Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, and more than 140 officers were injured. For the first time since the War of 1812, the U.S. Capitol had been violently overrun. Images of Confederate flags and extremist symbols carried through the rotunda reverberated around the world, raising questions not just about security, but about the stability of democracy itself. In the days and weeks that followed, accountability began to unfold. While only a handful of rioters were arrested on January 6th itself, the FBI launched one of the largest criminal investigations in American history. Using surveillance footage, cell phone data, and the rioters' own social media posts, arrests accelerated throughout 2021. Hundreds were charged by year's end, ranging from unlawful entry to assault on law enforcement and conspiracy. Just 1 week after the attack, the House of Representatives impeached President Donald Trump for a second time, charging him with incitement of insurrection. It was a historic moment. This made him the first president in U.S. history to be impeached twice. The impeachment drew inevitable comparisons to earlier moments of constitutional crisis. Andrew Johnson's impeachment in 1868 during Reconstruction, Richard Nixon's near impeachment in 1974 during Watergate, and Bill Clinton's impeachment in '98 over perjury and obstruction. Trump's first impeachment in 2019 was centered on pressuring Ukraine to investigate a political rival while withholding military aid, blurring the lines between personal political interest and official presidential power. It tested the boundaries of presidential accountability. The second, however, directly involved an attack on the democratic process itself. The Senate trial took place in February, after Trump had already left office, another first in American history. While a majority of senators voted to convict, the effort fell short of the 2/3 required. Still, 7 Republican senators joined Democrats in voting guilty, the most bipartisan impeachment conviction vote in history. Amid this turbulence, a new administration took office. On January 20th, Joe Biden was inaugurated as the 46th President of the United States, promising a return to stability, norms, alliances, and trust in government. History was also made beside him, as Kamala Harris was sworn in as Vice President, the first woman to hold the office. Notably absent were Donald Trump and his family, marking the first time in more than 150 years that an outgoing president refused to attend his successor's inauguration. Then in February, a massive winter storm crippled the power grid in Texas. Extreme cold caused widespread equipment failures, leaving millions without electricity or heat for days and contributing to hundreds of deaths. The crisis revealed an energy system that had been poorly winterized despite warnings after a similar storm in 2011 and was further strained by Texas's largely isolated grid, which limited the ability to import power from other states. Climate scientists warned that extreme weather events were becoming more frequent, not less. Later that year, global attention turned to COP26, the United Nations Climate Conference held in Glasgow. World leaders pledged new emissions targets and reaffirmed the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, but critics argued the commitments fell short of what science demanded. The gap between climate ambition and action remained one of the defining tensions of the year. By early spring, the federal government moved once more to prop up an economy still wobbling from the pandemic shock. In March, President Biden signed the American Rescue Plan, a $1.9 trillion stimulus package that built directly on earlier pandemic relief efforts. Like the CARES Act and PPP before it, the goal was speed and scale. Most Americans received $1,400 direct payments, unemployment benefits were extended, aid flowed to state and local governments, and a temporary expansion of the child tax credit sent monthly checks to families, briefly driving child poverty to historic lows. Supporters argued the spending was necessary to prevent a fragile recovery from collapsing, especially after uneven vaccine rollout and lingering shutdowns. Critics countered that coming on top of earlier stimulus, it risked flooding the economy with too much money too fast. That argument hardened into a political fault line, with stimulus increasingly framed as both the bridge out of crisis and a contributor to rising prices. In early 2021, many economists, including the Federal Reserve and Chair Jerome Powell, who was appointed by Trump in 2017, repeatedly described inflation as transitory. But in March, a strangely comic but deeply revealing event exposed the fragility of global trade. A massive container ship, the Ever Given, became lodged sideways in the Suez Canal after being caught in high winds. For 6 days, one of the world's most critical shipping routes was completely blocked. Hundreds of ships backed up at either end, delaying billions of dollars in goods, exacerbating the pandemic-related supply chain issues. Memes flooded the internet, but behind the humor was a serious lesson about global supply stresses, which also collided with an economic and cultural upheaval in financial markets. By the end of 2021, the Fed acknowledged that inflation was lasting longer than initially expected, as it surged to 7%, the highest annual increase since 1982, also fueled by the multiple supply constraints, strong consumer demand, energy price increases, and labor shortages due to the difficulty rehiring workers. Meanwhile, COVID-19 vaccines rolled out at unprecedented speed, driven by years of research and the rapid deployment of mRNA technology. These vaccines were reported to have saved millions of lives and represented a scientific breakthrough with implications far beyond COVID, opening doors to future treatments for cancer, HIV, and other diseases once thought untouchable. Yet the virus continued to evolve. Variants like Delta and later Omicron surged across the globe, while vaccine inequity exposed stark divides between wealthy nations and the developing world. The technological advancement also collided with mistrust, misinformation, and political identity. Debates intensified over vaccine mandates. As the Delta variant surged in the second half of 2021, the Biden administration announced requirements for federal employees and contractors, healthcare workers at Medicare and Medicaid-funded facilities, and proposed rules for large employers to require vaccination or weekly testing. At the same time, cities and states adopted their own mandates for teachers, public employees, and healthcare staff, while universities and major corporations imposed similar rules. Vaccine passports, proof of vaccination required to enter workplaces, schools, restaurants, or entertainment venues, spread in parts of the US, Canada, and Europe, while being explicitly banned in several US states. Supporters argued these measures were necessary to prevent hospitals from being overwhelmed and as a collective responsibility, the final step in ending a once-in-a-century crisis. Opponents saw them as government overreach and a step too far after lockdowns, stimulus programs, and other emergency powers. What had begun as a public health response became a cultural and political divide, turning a medical solution into one of the most contentious issues of the year. But by mid-2022, almost 80% of US adults had received at least one dose. Other scientific progress continued to push forward. NASA's Perseverance rover searched for signs of ancient microbial life on Mars, while its companion helicopter, Ingenuity, achieved the first powered flight on another planet. In December, the James Webb Space Telescope launched, promising to peer deeper into the universe than any telescope before it. 2021 was also the year retail investors went from spectators to protagonists. Online communities, especially Reddit's Wall Street Bets, turned investing into a collective spectacle. The movement exploded with GameStop, a struggling video game retailer that became the center of a financial rebellion. Hedge funds had heavily shorted the stock, betting it would fail. Retail traders noticed and coordinated mass buying, triggering one of the largest short squeezes in market history, and a 2,000% increase from the start of the year to its peak. At the center of the frenzy was Keith Gill, known online as Roaring Kitty, who had been publicly posting his bullish GameStop position for months. As the stock soared, Gill became a folk hero, a symbol of everyday investors taking on Wall Street. Congressional hearings followed, where Gill testified calmly under oath, wearing a red headband, memorably stating, "I am not a cat." AMC Entertainment stock soon followed, embraced by traders as both investment and protest, rising up to 1,000%. The language of finance became internet slang. Diamond hands for those who refused to sell, paper hands for those who did, and tendies, shorthand for profits, as the ultimate reward. Trading apps struggled under the volume, brokerages restricted buying, and trust in financial institutions eroded further. That same populist energy flowed directly into cryptocurrency. Bitcoin surged to new all-time highs in 2021 as institutional investors piled in, but it was Dogecoin, created years earlier as a joke, that captured the public imagination. Fueled by Reddit hype, TikTok trends, and relentless tweets from Elon Musk, Dogecoin skyrocketed in value. Other meme coins followed, many with little purpose beyond momentum and community. Some investors made fortunes. Many others learned painful lessons about volatility and speculation. Crypto became finance, culture, and ideology all at once. Then came NFTs. Non-fungible tokens exploded into the mainstream, offering blockchain-backed proof of ownership for digital assets. One of the most influential projects was Bored Ape Yacht Club, launched in April. Each cartoon ape was unique, and ownership doubled as both status symbol and membership into an exclusive club. Celebrities, athletes, and tech elites rushed in, driving prices into the hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, of dollars. Critics called it a bubble, Supporters called it the future of digital identity. By the end of the year, NFTs merged with talk of the metaverse, immersive digital worlds where people could work, socialize, and trade. Virtual land became a real market. People spent real money buying and selling digital plots in places like Decentraland and the Sandbox. Corporations followed. Facebook rebranded itself as Meta, signaling a massive bet on a future where digital presence might matter as much as physical reality. Geopolitics in the real world also remained volatile. In May, violence erupted between Israel and Hamas, following tensions in Jerusalem over evictions in Sheikh Jarrah and clashes at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Rocket fire from Gaza was met with Israeli airstrikes, leading to 11 days of fighting and hundreds of deaths, most of them Palestinian civilians, before a ceasefire was reached. Later in the year was another foreign policy event, one of the most consequential of a generation: the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. After nearly 20 years of war, the Biden administration moved to complete a withdrawal prearranged under the previous Trump administration. The exit unfolded with stunning speed. Afghan government forces collapsed far faster than U.S. intelligence had anticipated. The Taliban swept into Kabul in August, regaining control of the country in a matter of days. What followed was a chaotic evacuation. Thousands of Afghans flooded Kabul's airport, desperate to flee. Images of families separated, people clinging to aircraft, and frantic crowds became some of the most haunting visuals of 2021. During the evacuation, before the withdrawal was complete, an ISIS-K suicide bomber attacked Abbey Gate at the airport, killing 13 U.S. service members and more than 170 Afghan civilians. The final U.S. military aircraft departed on August 30th, officially ending America's longest war. The withdrawal drew intense criticism from Republicans and Democrats alike, with Biden accused of poor planning, intelligence failures, and mishandling the evacuation. His approval ratings dropped sharply in the weeks that followed. Supporters argued the war was unwinnable and that ending it was necessary. Critics argued it was executed disastrously, marking a turning point in public trust and U.S. foreign policy confidence. And in November, after months of negotiation and political infighting, President Biden signed the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act into law. The bipartisan bill authorized roughly $1.2 trillion in spending, including historic investments in roads and bridges, public transit, ports, broadband internet, clean water systems, and the electrical grid itself. Supporters hailed it as the largest infrastructure investment in decades and a long overdue effort to modernize America's physical backbone. Critics questioned the cost and scope, but the bill marked a rare moment of cross-party agreement and a recognition that aging infrastructure had become both an economic liability and a national security concern. Sports offered moments of both escape and meaning. In February, Tom Brady won yet another Super Bowl, his seventh, this time with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 43 years old, Brady further cemented his status as the most accomplished quarterback in NFL history, redefining age and longevity in professional sports. And the Milwaukee Bucks captured their first NBA championship in 50 years, led by Giannis Antetokounmpo. He became one of sports' most inspiring stories through his humble journey, born in Greece to Nigerian immigrants, and working as a street vendor in Athens before his discovery by basketball scouts and ultimately becoming MVP. And the Tokyo Olympics, postponed from 2020, were finally held under strict pandemic protocols, empty stadiums, and masked athletes. Yet moments of humanity broke through. Simone Biles withdrew from several events to protect her mental health, sparking a global conversation about pressure, expectations, and well-being. Naomi Osaka did the same in tennis, reinforcing that vulnerability could coexist with greatness. In entertainment, streaming fully took over. Netflix, Disney+, HBO Max, and others battled for dominance as movie theaters struggled to recover. Squid Game, a South Korean survival drama, became a global phenomenon, proving that subtitles were no barrier to cultural impact. Music saw the rise of artists like Olivia Rodrigo, whose debut album captured the angst of a generation, while Taylor Swift re-recorded her earlier albums, reclaiming ownership of her work and reshaping conversations around artists' rights. Social media continued to evolve and fracture. TikTok became the cultural engine of Gen Z, shaping music, fashion, humor, and even politics in 60-second bursts. At the same time, whistleblower Frances Haugen revealed internal documents showing that Facebook, now Meta, knew its platforms caused harm, yet prioritized profit over safety. Work culture and language also evolved. Zoom fatigue, hybrid work, and quiet quitting entered the lexicon, while mental health moved from whispered concern to mainstream conversation. So that was 2021, a time when democracy was tested, markets became memes, and science delivered hope. It wasn't a reset, it was a reckoning. This has been Old News, a year in review. Remember, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. If you're enjoying and learning, please follow, rate, and share. Thanks, and have a great year living in the present.